Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have everyone here. My name is Sarah Ortiz-Shields, and I am the Executive Director of Austin Tech Alliance. Austin Tech Alliance is a nonpartisan nonprofit that advocates for civic engagement in Austin's tech sector. We do this in a variety of ways, ranging from monthly events such as this one, which is our first digital event, so thank you all for being here, to a policy agenda, which you can find on our website, to community events and just community engagement. Currently, we've been spending a lot of time working on census advocacy and voting in Texas and in Travis County. Just a small plug, if you have not taken the census, it is extremely important. You can take the census at my2020census.gov. And if you need to register to vote, you can register to vote at register2vote.org. I'm really excited to have our speakers here today. The way that our event is going to run today is each panelist will speak for about 10 minutes, and attendees will have the opportunity to ask questions and answers through the Q&A tool on Zoom. If we have Q&A for each panelist, I will then read them out and then they'll answer them in the following Q&A session after their talk. So if you have questions, please use the Q&A tool, not the chat tool. Today we are going to be talking about 5G technology, and we have some really interesting speakers, not only from Austin, but nationwide, and I'm really excited about that. If you are not familiar with 5G, you're gonna really understand what it's about today and how it's gonna benefit our communities and our lives. Let's just give it a couple more minutes. People are still just trickling in. Give it just 1 or 2 more minutes. If you want to follow along on ATA's social media, you can follow us at Austin Tech on Twitter and chime in with your own discussion points and your own Q&A there too. We'll be monitoring our social media during the talk and retweeting and answering questions during this event. All right, I think it's time to get started. I would love to introduce our first panelist. Our first speaker is Dave Walter. Dave Walter is the Assistant Vice President of Radio Technology and Architecture at AT&T. Dave is responsible for driving the assessment, development, and evolution of AT&T's advanced radio technologies and architectures, including LTE advanced, unlicensed systems, fixed wireless access, and 5G technologies. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. As Sarah said, my name is Dave Walter. I lead the radio technology team here at AT&T Labs in Austin. We take a look from sort of a 2-year to 5-year view of where technology is going and its evolution. We've been very much involved in 5G since actually about 2014. And getting things started takes a while before you can get the spectrum or the standards in place. Most of you probably have some view or understanding today of 5G, but when you think about the different generations of wireless technology, we've kind of moved from voice and messaging to data, and LTE was primarily about high-speed data. And as we looked at 5G, we started thinking about how should this be different? What kind of capabilities do we need to have in a wireless network that are not currently there? So when you look at 5G, you really sort of have 3 different pillars. One is enhanced mobile broadband, and as everybody tends to think of the next generation, right? It's higher speed, better spectral efficiency, always bigger, better, faster. And that's really been needed, this higher capacity and higher speeds. We have seen our data grow 580,000% since 2007. And so that increased capacity is really critical to keep the quality of service that people have grown used to. And these days, video usage is over half of that traffic and continues to grow rapidly. But in addition to just more of the mobile broadband, if you look at where things are going, everything that can be connected is being connected, right? So massive IoT is something that's going to become more and more important as we move forward. Sensors, and then the analytics that can go along with that, and ways that it can improve society, improve our capabilities. But also when we look at what LTE was able to do well, what it didn't do so well, we also wanted to enable what's called URLLC, ultra reliable low latency communications. We wanted to enable real-time services. You want to be able to do things like AR and VR. You want to be able to provide communication for industrial control systems, autonomous vehicles. You've all heard a lot of different examples of the kinds of things that are being developed. So the idea was to try to create an air interface in particular that could manage all three of those, whereas LTE was really optimized only for the enhanced mobile broadband kind of use case. So when you look at that, what are some of the key enablers to this? First of all, we wanted, as I say, we wanted a single air interface. We wanted to make it more efficient. We wanted to make it flexible so that the subcarrier spacing could be different, that I can mix massive IoT along with mobile broadband, do that in a single air interface and do it in an efficient way. But as I look at that and you want to enable these new techniques, these new services, it's not just a new radio that you need. We need to think about the entire end-to-end architecture. And so that includes a new core network, often referred to as the 5G next generation core. It's control plane, user plane separation. It's the use of things like network slicing to be able to share physical infrastructure in ways virtually that allow you to put the function where it's most needed for the kind of application that you're providing. And critically, multi-access edge computing that allows us to really drop the latency down for some of these real-time services and some of these what people refer to as Industry 4.0 kinds of services. So those are some of the real key needs and things that had to be addressed. This requires not just, as I say, the infrastructure, but it also requires coordination of things like the devices, spectrum, getting the right spectrum band, obviously all the access hardware, software, the transport, the core, and the content. So you need to think about all of that as you're designing this network. Another key aspect of that is wider bandwidth, right? So in order to get higher speeds, to get these high capacities, we want wide bandwidth RF channels. And so that drove us to looking at new spectrum options, millimeter wave. Everyone's familiar, I think, with the development of millimeter wave systems, the auction of millimeter wave frequencies here in the US. And it also drives us to looking at new spectrum bands. So while millimeter wave can give us very high throughput, it is unfortunately going to give us fairly short range. So in order to get the combination of throughput and range that we need to look at something in the mid-band spectrum, somewhere maybe between 2 and 6 gigahertz. And so there's a lot of work going on right now to try to make that available. And people I'm sure have heard about the CBRS band and the C-band auctions that are going to come up later this year. Some of the other techniques being brought to bear to help with that, adaptive antenna arrays and massive MIMO technologies to improve the efficiency, to reduce interference, enabling multi-user MIMO, again, to increase that capacity. We may not have the need in our devices to get a gigabit per second, even if we can, what will you do with that? But there may be 10 people standing around you, all of whom are wanting to watch HD or 4K video. And so we need that level of capacity. The other thing we want to bring to bear really is artificial intelligence and machine learning. So autonomous, contextual, and predictive networking to drive the experiences at a higher velocity, get them out there faster, make it better. And we need a new architecture to help facilitate that. And so one of the things that AT&T has been driving now is called Open RAN. So the ORAN Alliance, which is looking to create a disaggregated software-defined network that includes both core and RAN functions. If we can do all of that, then that really does change the way we live and work and play, right? So smart cities, looking at things like massive IoT, control systems, surveillance, video conferencing. I think everybody's kind of gotten used to, particularly with this pandemic, the amount of video conferencing traffic has gone up about 40% on our networks compared to before COVID. So we have pretty massive capacity needs. And when you think about things like maybe going to 3D volumetric representations of people, those kinds of things, the capacity continues to grow. Entertainment, you know, the capacity again for video, AR, VR, mixed reality, tourism, remote work, remote expert kinds of applications are all going to be enabled by some of these different techniques. Learning, I think, is going to make a big change in terms of the use of AR, VR, and mixed reality and so on in an educational setting, be that remote or be that in a classroom. Enterprise and manufacturing is probably one of the areas that we see the biggest change, and one of the areas where AT&T has really begun to address in a big way. So if you think about things like industrial control and safety, flexibilities in moves and adds, machine placement on a factory floor, for instance, a lot of the things that you were doing before really required wired infrastructure to get the kind of throughput and latency required for the performance of those systems. Now we've got wireless systems that will be able to provide those levels of performance, and it's really going to help a lot in the industrial applications. At the same time, those enterprises, many of them want on-site data processing, storage, and security. So the ability to have edge computing and get the content and offload out of the network locally and provide local control is very important. I think we're going to see the same kinds of things with utilities for things like power grid management, precise real-time monitoring to speed repairs and reduce downtime. And of course, everybody uses the example of transportation, the autonomous cars, drones, drone delivery, and so forth, along with remote and telemedicine and so forth. So in doing, in creating this capability, we open up a lot of new possibilities that we didn't have before. Of course, there's a lot of work still to be done. Currently, we at AT&T are in the process of deploying these initial 5G networks, but everybody worldwide really is in the infancy of what that deployment is going to look like. So we have deployed millimeter wave systems in parts of 35 cities. We're also deploying systems in what's known as the sub-6 gigahertz band. So we will be using the existing bands that we use today for LTE. Those will evolve to use 5G NR as well. But as we mentioned earlier, the CBRS band, the C band are going to come into play in sort of that middle band spectrum to really provide some of the big benefits that we see with NR. And we are currently live with our sub-6 gigahertz system in about 190 markets. So today we cover about 120 million people. This summer we will complete a nationwide build out. And then there are right now probably just 3 or 4 devices that can access the millimeter wave system and the sub-6 system. But by the end of the year, we plan to have about 15 different devices out and operating. So it's really starting to crank up. I think you're going to see that 2021 is really the year where things really start to snowball, and we start to see some of the capabilities come into play, particularly as we can start getting some of the release 16 features out of the labs at the end of 21 and into 2022 and into the market. So, clearly there are some areas that still need some work. We continue down the path of standardization, continued development in release 17, release 18, things like mobile IAB, mobile integrated access and backhaul, MIMO enhancements, particularly for the FDD spectrum, perhaps things like network fountain coding to improve reliability. And one of the areas that we're pretty excited about exploring further is integrated communication and sensing. So as we start moving into the millimeter wave regime, you can start to bring some real sensing capabilities in their positioning and so forth that you can combine along with your communication capability. So that's going to be quite exciting as well. We are also working with NTIA and DoD and looking at new spectrum opportunities. So the C-band is going to bring about 280 megahertz of spectrum along. We're also looking at the 3.1 to 3.55 gigahertz band and working with DoD and NTIA to determine what part of that band might be either provided to commercial use or shared with DoD applications to provide more of that mid-band spectrum to get those throughput rates and low latencies that people are looking for. So I think much like 4G introduced the world to the gig economy, and we really didn't know quite what was going to come as we designed LTE, we just knew we wanted it to be faster. We believe that mobile 5G is going to really jumpstart that next wave of unforeseen innovation with all of the capabilities for real-time services, as well as massive connectivity. So it's going to be quite interesting to watch how that develops. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, we have, I think, an interesting one here. It says, can you describe what it takes to deploy the physical cell phone tower infrastructure for 5G versus LTE of today?
Well, in a macro environment, large areas of coverage, it's pretty similar. In fact, we've been deploying radio systems on those towers for a couple of years that are software upgradable to 5G NR. What you're going to see more of, I think, with 5G than you did even with 4G is the small cell environment. So either on buildings, rooftops, the sides of buildings, but a lot more street furniture, right? Particularly when you start looking at things like millimeter wave. So that's going to be a bit different. And you start looking at things like getting access to the mounting locations, getting access to power, getting access to backhaul. So, when you start looking at how do I mount these things every 100, 150 meters apart, those are not necessarily places you've run fiber to over the years. So you either have to get fiber to some of those locations, or you use something, a point-to-point radio system, like in the millimeter wave band, perhaps, or a technique that we developed in my team and took into standards called IAB, which I referenced earlier, which uses the same antenna and radio to provide access to the customer's device, and at the same time form a beam back to another radio that does have fiber access. So you do backhaul as well as access out of the same device. So there are a lot of issues, obviously, that come with that. How do they look? How big are they? How much power do they draw, and so forth? And I think the real difference is going to be in how we brings up.
Great. Let's take this other question. It says, what is a PIN tower, PINN tower for 5G, and will this be standard?
I guess I'm not familiar with that acronym, PINN tower.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. Here, let's see. I think you said 14 device types being qualified for 5G by year's end. What characteristics make up a device?
Well, I think we've publicly announced that we intend to have, I believe it's 15 devices available by the end of the year. Most of these devices are handsets, but I think you'll also see we've got a kind of a Wi-Fi puck also out on the market that communicates millimeter wave back to the 5G system and then provides Wi-Fi access nearby. So I think you may see one or two of those types of devices. You're going to see handsets. I think whether it's us or other providers, you'll probably see some fixed wireless equipment. where you may see a panel antenna mounted outside the home and wired back into an indoor router. But when I just talked about that specifically, I was thinking more in terms of the mobile network, so it was handsets and the Wi-Fi plugs.
Great. I have a few more questions, but I think that these are also applicable to all of the other panelists. So I'm going to say thank you for your time. That was very interesting. And we are going to move on to our next lightning talk. Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you to AT&T.
Thank you. Right.
Our next speakers are Rondella Hawkins and John Guinan from the city of Austin. Rondella is the Telecommunications and Regulatory Affairs Officer, and John Guinan is the Project Manager for Small Cell Permitting in the city of Austin. I'm very excited to have them with us today. Dave, if you could, or Rondella.
We're tag teaming it, so John is going to share the screen. First, want to thank Sarah for the invitation for us to talk to ATA, and I think that my following Dave is really it's a good segue because we're talking about the installation of the small cell and 5G networks in the city on streets and assets and poles. And first, want to say the city of Austin embraces innovation and emerging technologies. I think for many years we've demonstrated, we're a test bed, but we are committed to working with the providers and carriers and coming up with a deployment strategy that as a city, we have to look at the management of the right-of-way, traffic congestion, public health and safety, and balance all of those needs of the various stakeholders. Because we have a lot of activity and construction going on within downtown and even with the mobile corridor projects. And so there's just a lot of this infrastructure. As you heard, it's short range. I don't think Austin and other cities have seen this amount of infrastructure deployed in the right of way. The number, you've got 4 to 6 carriers and customers, and then you've got these different systems. It's just there's a lot of impact, and we want to minimize that impact, but we want to make our community connected and have this 5G and other emerging technologies available to our residents and businesses. And so it's just from a city perspective, from policy, it's just the management of all of these interests. And I just wanted to set the stage for John Guinan, who has been on our team now about 1.5 years as the small cell project manager. So he's been working with providers and city departments, and he's going to kind of go into the details, and then I'm going to wrap up with talking about some of our some initiatives the city has for our digital connectedness. Thank you, and here's John.
Thanks, Rondella. Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Going to try to give a 1,000-foot view of the permitting, the status of permitting for small cells and particularly 5G within the city of Austin. Some process improvements we've undertaken and where we see things going. And of course, the slide is not advancing. So Telecommunications and Regulatory Affairs, commonly known as TARA, Rondella heads up this department, and we're the working group within the city that processes and issues the small cell permit. That permit covers the installation from the point of service for fiber and electricity through the right of way to the point of attachment, be it a light pole, a traffic control signal, or a node pole, and then up through to the point of transmission, to the antenna. Any work that's done to get power or fiber to the point of service is covered under separate permitting. So we oversee the intake process and the fee collection. We coordinate the interdepartmental review. We shepherd it through the various city departments, and depending on where a particular node is located, it may require a department, say it's the Parks Department, if it's in right of way adjacent to parkland, that may require Parks to be brought into that review process, where something in the middle of downtown at 2nd and Lavaca is not going to require that. So we coordinate that process, and we act as the primary interface between the wireless industry and the various city departments involved in small cell deployments. We are trying to be proactive and work with the industry on infrastructure solutions, methods of construction that work for everybody and support the needs of the community, the general health and welfare of the community, as well as speed to market for the carriers. Small cell project began in 2017. Since that time, we've received over 900 small cell applications. At present, we have 515 approved small cell applications. That's a combination of both 4G and 5G. To give some frame of reference, when we came into the beginning of 2019, we had about 60 approved permits and got up close to or just broke 300, 325 by the end of 2019, and are on track to approve another 400 to 500, depending on the flow of applications, through the end of this year. And one of the things we have focused on is the expedition of the permit review process. And there's a shot clock that governs this, and we have not had a whole lot of issues complying with that. But what we focused on was having to touch each application fewer times. So we implemented some process improvements, particularly a standard site plan. And at the end of March of last year, when we started tracking this, each application went through an average of 3.8 review cycles. We implemented the standard site plan, but we also got great support and work product from the applicants, from the wireless community, the engineering firms, the carriers, the managed deployment companies, and the quality of the intake product went up. So those two things, we've dropped it down to just about 2 review cycles on average per application. So if we're touching them half as many times, we're able to, push more through the pipeline with the same level of due diligence. We have 130 approved 5G applications at present, and we have 163 that are in process. The 5G small cell applications come in one of 3 ways. They either come in as a standalone 5G site, no other band being transmitted from the site, a combination of 4G and 5G on one node at the initial application, and 5G being added to existing cell sites. So there was sites that were early in the initial small cell deployment where we're now seeing site plan revisions being submitted for 5G to be added to those sites. So this is a typical small cell in Austin. The photo on the right would be an Austin Transportation Department traffic control signal. You can see that there is a base cabinet which incorporates the pedestrian push button for public safety to get folks across the street, a meter and a disconnect, and then some risers taking us up to this 4G antenna. So the picture to the right would be an example where 5G was added, and this is the integrated and new radio product where the antenna and the radio head are incorporated into one unit, as opposed to the radio heads being down in this base cabinet for 4G. Mr. Walker did a much better job than I would be able to go into the detail of these applications, but we're seeing effectively 3 different use cases or targets of deployment. So first is the mobile broadband applications with unprecedented speeds, obviously. 4G was given 30 to 50 in a really well-performing environment, where 5G peak is hopefully going to get us up over a gig. We're seeing what looks to be the beginnings of the deployment of fixed wireless networks for residential and commercial customers. This would be akin to what Dave described at the end of his presentation, the Wi-Fi pucks or service to a residence. And then we're starting the internal conversations for how do we partner with the interdepartmentally as well as the private sector for all of the smart city and connected IoT devices, and make infrastructure planning decisions that contemplate those things. So things like traffic control, smart parking, public transport, smart resource recovery, energy efficient street lighting. These are all things that may be in flight as individual standalone products, where there's an effort now to bring these under a more cohesive plan for the city. Just wanted to show this by way of example in terms of what we're seeing for densification. The color coding doesn't represent different carriers. It represents the different status that an application may be in. But this is from MLK to the river, 35 to Lamar. And each one of these little boxes represents a small cell application that's in some state of review. There are other pockets of densification throughout the city, and we're working on some improved reporting metrics where we can roll the technology type up and application counts by zip, but we don't have that available today. This is just to give an idea of what the densification is starting to look like in downtown, which is the hotbed of applications at the moment, although that's starting to spread out. And then I'll hand it back to Rondella. She was going to speak to the digital initiatives.
Thank you, John. I just wanted to take an opportunity with this audience. With COVID-19, it has elevated the critical necessity for digital connectivity. I mean, I think all of us can agree, and most of us are benefit from having high quality connectivity. But there are many vulnerable populations and underserved in our community, and we had to pivot to distance learning, for distance education, telehealth, remote working. We have operate, the city partners with Austin Freenet and our libraries, but those labs have been closed throughout COVID-19, and we are reopening the libraries. But that was a resource for those that didn't have connectivity to go to. We as a city, we have a computer refurbishing program that all of the city devices that are refurbished, we're getting them cleaned, and they are getting made ready loaded with Microsoft Office and operating systems, and we're distributing those to the community. It's a program we've had underway for about a year, but we've definitely seen a surge in the request for devices. We've got Austin Freenet, who is working with Ruckify, and we've had private donations, and I've been able to allocate about 300 computers to families in need so far. There's a lack of connectivity for the students. And, you saw on the news, and you may have, worked, with AISD on providing some Wi-Fi connectivity in buses. And then we've got our Capital Metro buses. They are going to extend that program through the summer, but it's very limited, and it's a Band-Aid, for those that lack connectivity. We have a grant program that I wanted to just talk about for nonprofits to apply for digital inclusion programs. And we also have a company. The city has this digital empowerment community of Austin that is a collaborative of nonprofits and private sector and it's just a whole community that's focused around digital inclusion, whether it be connectivity, devices, or digital literacy training, the three, legs of the stool. And we know that, as part of an economic recovery is building the resiliency of our community members, and that's through opportunities and job training in the digital economy. And so that's something we as a community and Workforce Solutions and the city and others need to focus on, lifting people up and building some resiliency through those training efforts. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of of some initiatives and programs. And if you're interested, the next slide, I believe, has John has the next slide has our contact information. But if you're interested in learning more about the programs or want to be a part, or if you know of a tech company, or if there's any donations, I'm just putting a call out there to the community. And if you want to get involved, you've got our office website. You can just go to the city's homepage and do telecom and regulatory affairs or digital inclusion, and it'll take you to the link, or just contact myself. So that wraps up our presentation, and thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Great, we have a couple of good questions. What is the timing of the City of Austin to deploy smart city infrastructure? And is there a particular section of town which will be implemented first?
And I can answer that, and I'll speak on behalf. I know that our Austin Transportation Department, they just announced that they're, and I don't know the company, but they are looking at traffic sensors to look at, the flow of traffic. And they just announced that there's various smart city solutions being deployed by various city departments. So I mean, they're underway now. We've got, wireless meter reading by Austin Water that they're approaching. We've got Austin Transportation Department that has a variety of projects. But we have so I don't have a cohesive answer for you, but there are different types of projects and initiatives, and we want to come up with a more cohesive plan for that. And I don't have a timeline for that. So it's kind of an answer.
We have a couple of versions of this question, but the gist of the question is, will each carrier deploy their own 5G network, or will there be a way for them to share resources? I think that might be a good one for Rondella.
Actually, that is a good co-location. Sharing of resources would certainly help with reducing the impact or the placement of street furniture or antennas or poles. But currently, I believe that each carrier has its own infrastructure, its own antenna system at this time, because there were some concerns of interference of signals. And I know that there's a lot of innovation and things going on in this space. But John, do you have if you want to?
Yeah, and Dave could speak to this probably better than me, but my understanding is that there is not a carrier neutral antenna for 5G that would transmit the various bands for the various 5G carriers, as there is with 4G antennas, where you have carrier neutral antenna has 20 ports and each carrier can plug into it and transmit on their frequency. My understanding is that that is not yet available in the 5G space. So at present, they're individual standalone pieces of infrastructure. Is that accurate enough, Ms. Wolver? I think
there are definitely technical issues that make that more difficult as your bandwidth gets wider. But I think it's also, there's some business differences, business issues, the areas that any given provider wants to address first, applications they try to address first. the ability to have the control to make the kinds of upgrades and changes in the network that they need to make. You know, all of those do play into how you go about the deployments. I think, you know, where you see more of the sharing tends to be in the indoor environment, right? Where you have DAS systems or even small cell systems that are neutral host that can operate with multiple providers. As you say, that's mostly seen today in the LTE space. May well be seen in the 5G space as well.
And let's take one more question for the city. How do these technologies help expand access and reduce costs to underserviced populations and communities whose needs have become very clear throughout COVID?
Rondella, do you want to speak to that, or would you like me to? Okay, I think the simple answer is that it's more offerings within the marketplace. It's going to increase the amount of infrastructure that's available, potentially increase competition, and those things tend to be good for the consumer. We don't have a whole lot of sway in that space, but we have seen that the carriers are. I'm very fortunate to work with a great group of civically minded professionals on the applicant side. So these issues have not been lost on them. But I think it's the marketplace predominantly at this point that will support that opening up of access.
Great. Thank you, Rondella. Thank you, John. And thank you to the City of Austin for participating. I found that extremely interesting and helpful. We are going to move on to our next lightning talk. I would love to welcome Mark Rudnick from Crown Castle. Mark is the Vice President of Product Development at Crown Castle and is responsible for defining business initiatives, evaluating emerging technologies, and bringing to market solutions that leverage Crown Castle's tower, fiber, and small cell assets. Welcome, Mark.
Sarah, appreciate the introduction. And as Sarah mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Product Development at Crown Castle, so I get to look at new technologies, emerging technologies, and evaluate them and see how we can leverage Crown Castle's assets to be able to bring those cost effectively to market. So Crown Castle is a shared communications infrastructure company. Our infrastructure connects people to essential data and wireless services. That's a foundation of the 5G technologies that we'll be rolling out. We have approximately 40,000 cell towers within the US, around 70,000 outdoor small cells that are either on air or in construction. The vast majority of those are shared, and I'll come back to that in just a second to discuss the last question that was asked. In addition to that, about 80,000 miles of dense metro fiber throughout every major market in the US. So when we talk about the sharing of outdoor small cells, there are certainly some challenges, as Dave brought up, especially around millimeter wave technologies and being able to share antennas within that frequency bands are challenging. But as we look at the lower bands and the mid-band technologies, we've been sharing assets for a large number of years, as I mentioned, on the majority of these outdoor small cells. And it really depends upon where the carriers have a need and the amount of equipment that needs to be located in a certain area. So the number of frequency bands, the types of antennas, etc. But the underlying infrastructure that's being shared is the fiber infrastructure. As Dave mentioned, there the need for power at each of these sites, as well as the vertical asset to be able to mount those antennas, both for 4G and 5G technologies. So Dave talked about this a little bit. So as we look at the transition from and the evolution to 5G, and think about the 1G delivering analog voice and connecting people, and then moving to text messages, and then as we moved into 3Gs, we start to look at some small amounts of data that were being introduced. And then 4G really starts the era of mobile internet and mobile applications. And as we move into 5G technologies, there are things that we can't even dream about that this will enable, as far as the transition between the businesses that exist for 4G technologies, the transition from 3G to 4G, and then 4G into the 5G technology. So the key tenets of 5G, and what are they bringing us? They're going to deliver approximately a 20 times increase in speed over existing 4G networks. And this is through a combination of new frequency bands, either in the millimeter wave frequency bands that are being talked about and being currently deployed by the wireless carriers, and also, as Dave mentioned, the CBRS band and also the 3.5 band as well, or the C band as well. So the mid band, that's broader coverage, and millimeter wave bands, generally very high speed connectivity, but short distances on the order of 100 meters or so, requiring line of sight as well. About a 10,000 increase in capacity and efficiency, and a huge decrease, a 10x decrease in latency. So if we think about the connectivity that occurs, and I was surprised when I was looking at the number of devices that are connected to my home Wi-Fi device, over 25 devices within my house. And it's like, what are all these things? You've got your smart watches, you have your Nest thermostat, your Ring doorbell. I could connect my washing machine. I don't know why I'd want to be able to do that, but I can connect that. But this is a manual process that we need to go through, connecting our devices into the Wi-Fi network, etc. What 5G enables us to do is that much more efficiently. So I'll be shipped a device, an IoT type device, a smart home device, that is already connected to the network when I open the box. And I can do that much more cost effectively with the 5G network than I could do with the 4G network. So these are some of the key tenets and the key things that we see within 5G that is so much more compelling that we've seen with 4G. The other thing to think about is just the economic growth that 5G and the impact that will have. There's an estimated 3 million new jobs that will be created, about $50 billion in new GDP, and $275 billion in infrastructure investment. We talked through some of this infrastructure investment already, through the new fiber that's required, the new sites that are needed, both macro sites and small cell sites, and Dave mentioned as well the edge computing infrastructure, the new core network that's required for 5G to realize those low latency applications and the different use cases that we evolve as a result of having this low latency, high bandwidth, multiple devices connectivity. Those are all required a transition of this network and significant amount of infrastructure investment. So we bring it into Austin specifically. We're looking at about, and this is over the next 7 years, about 9,000 new jobs that are being created just within the Austin area, an estimated $1.5 billion in GDP and growth, and in infrastructure investment, which we see from what John and Rondello was talking about, the number of small cell applications that are being deployed within the city of Austin. That's just as we're starting to roll out these 5G networks, and we are in the very early stages of being able to go through this deployments of 5G. And this will impact both large companies and small companies. If you think about companies like Dell, and huge transitions with edge computing, and smaller companies or companies like startups in Austin, such as Vapor.io, that's in the edge computing, the mobile edge computing space. So across that whole different ecosystem, you'll see huge changes. And think of through the evolution of 4G to 5G, things like that didn't exist with 3G as you move into 4G, ride-sharing applications, mobile commerce, for better or worse, mobile video conferencing now. I mean, if we can't get away from having our video conferences even when we're on the road, or hopefully at some point in the not too distant future outside of our houses. So all these transitions as you move from one technology to another technology. And as we think about the expansion of 5G and what that will do for different industries, as I mentioned, there are different companies that will be impacted, but also huge impacts to the industry as well. So if you think about the energy and gas utilities, power companies need to not only monitor their power stations and the metering, but also the transmission and distribution of the grid. 5G will enable the significant cost reduction that we talked about, the smart meters being rolled out, being able to do the metering and then smart grid capabilities. And as we move further along the low latency applications of 5G, be able to add sensors to the transmission lines. So it's not too out of the question to be able to have a sensor on a falling transmission line, be able to cut the power to that transmission line before it hits the ground to prevent a forest fire. So things like these are game changers in fire prevention and public safety. And one of the things I'm really excited about is the 5G transformation within healthcare. And I'll take a look within our next slide of one of those applications. So think about in a 5G world where you have a wearable device that somebody, a smartwatch, Fitbit, etc., that alerts a family member or healthcare professional that somebody's having a heart attack or has fallen or both. And a drone could be dispatched to bring a live video feed to that person in need. Virtual reality glasses or augmented reality glasses could be attached to a defibrillator to guide a person standing by, a Good Samaritan, to go through and how to utilize that defibrillator. The ambulance is automatically dispatched in parallel. Smart traffic sensors be able to clear the traffic away, be able to get the ambulance to the site quickly and be able to address this. And real-time video signals both while you're at the scene and also in transport back to the hospital for the doctors to be able to analyze and triage the patient before they even arrive into the emergency room. Now, these things sound like they're very far out, but they're not. And I've seen at Carnegie Mellon University, for example, the augmented reality defibrillator step-through process in place. We've seen drone deliveries already in articles in the paper today about delivering during this COVID crisis medical supplies and personal protective equipment to hospitals. So this is not the world of 10 to 15 years out. You know, some of these things are happening right now. As a timeline, thankfully the timeline I've put out in the paper here matches up with what Dave was talking about as well. Not all of these things are here today, but they will be here in the next 2 to 4 years, in the 2021, 2022 timeframe. As we were talking about, there are changes that are required in the core of the network to make these things happen for the low latency applications that we need, but also the infrastructure that needs to be on these small cell sites for densification for those high bandwidth requirements and also the low latency as well. As we've discussed, there's a significant upgrade to the wireless networks that need to make for all these low latency applications. And we're excited to see this migration out of the universities, Carnegie Mellon example that I talked about, and into the public as soon as late 2021, early 2022. So really exciting time for the transition from 4G to 5G. And we're right at the cutting edge of it. And we're going to see a huge amount of growth in applications, use cases, et cetera, as we move into the next era of wireless technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some questions. And you know, there's so many questions coming in, we won't get to all of them, but I'll pick some. How can we in the telecom sector help address the misinformation around 5G and minimize?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is to really utilize the cited sources that are out there. So there is information from the CTIA website. If we look at the different misinformation that's being floated about and really use reliable sources, as I mentioned, on our Crown Castle website, we can also have references to and links to different sources that people can utilize to combat any misinformation is out there as well. So I think that's the key, is industry experts are available, and I would point people in those directions.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Mark. That was very interesting. And thank you to Crown Castle for participating today.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Shane Schilling, Chief Technology Officer at LOGIX Fiber Networks. Shane is responsible for the oversight and management of LOGIX's network and IT systems, delivering voice and data services. Welcome, Shane.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for all your talks. A lot of really good stuff being discussed. So appreciate you guys having me in. So of course, let's see. So won't belabor too much on me a little bit. Been in the industry for getting close to 20 years now, running voice, video, and data networks, primarily most of my career in some of the top 10 MSOs in the country. Now with LOGIX Communications and in charge of their fiber construction deployment, voice and data networks, and all their engineering and operations. So a little bit about LOGIX Fiber Networks, where we've been around for 30 plus years, was the first CLEC, I believe, registered in the state of Texas. So we have a rich history in voice and data. We service about 10,000 customers throughout Texas. We're a Texas-focused company. And we connect about 100 data centers in Texas, from Dallas all the way down to the border. So that gets us into a little bit of 5G and its business impact. And a number of folks have already touched on this a little bit, so I won't belabor it too much. But when I think about 5G, I think about it really as an ecosystem of technologies that are coming together. And I think 5G will not only bring them together, but help them mature. And what I mean by that is there's obviously all the wireless standards that Dave spoke about. But there's the software-defined networking components of it, the AI, the machine learning, and the edge computing. 5G, to realize all its promises, will need to use all of those, and I think it will also help mature all of those. And of course, as we know, entrepreneurs and businesses will start to utilize those more and more. So a number of folks have touched on it, but to kind of recap, the aspirations of 5G, as I see it, is one, we have the much higher capacity that I think gets most of the airtime right now and is the most realistic right now. And that primarily going to get consumed by video, I think we've talked about, at least in the recent history. And I've seen some stats that say by 2023, 75% of all the traffic on the airwaves will be video. But then you get into your machine-to-machine stuff, or your density, if you will, of devices. And I think what will drive a lot of that density will be machine-to-machine stuff, and that'll be very transformative in ways we probably haven't thought about it. Certainly in the industrial applications, smart cities, things like that. And then third, a number of people have mentioned the low latency, and I think to tag onto the low latency, the thing that I think is really powerful will be that end-to-end network guarantee. That network slicing. When you combine all of these together, that's really going to be the stuff of science fiction, or at least will seem like it. And people have touched upon that: remote surgery, vehicles driving around, robotics without wires, and a change of the public safety systems, I believe. So you have all of that, and I think the other component to really think about as 5G matures is all the software-defined stuff. The network will become much more virtualized. And I think the important part there for the business sector is that as we know, as things virtualize and become software innovation cycles are much faster than hardware innovation cycles. And that will drive innovation in ways that we haven't thought of, but I'm sure there are developers and entrepreneurs right now that are thinking of things we haven't thought of yet. So what does that kind of mean for businesses? Well, if you zoom back not that long ago, historically, businesses have been in a tethered environment with centralized computing tied to storage and all that stuff. Well, businesses is going to change and become very much more mobile with mobile cloud computing and things like that, which will enable them to really glean a lot of valuable insights about their business through different analytic means. I think just the aggregation of data and bringing it in from multiple sources will be powerful. I think businesses will probably struggle with that early on. There'll be just more than they can do. But that will drive a lot of real-time improvements and efficiencies for businesses. So whether it's smart warehousing, logistics, supply chains will be a big part. Smart factories, smart mining. I've seen some interesting discussions around things like smart mining and excavation and how that will change dramatically. As you right now today have, if you're in a mining operation or excavation operation, you're going to have big pieces of equipment, excavators and haulers. And that's the most efficient way to do that business right now. One big piece of equipment with a person driving it. But as 5G matures over the years and all these technologies come together, you now could very well have excavation and mining operations that you could never have before, because your equipment will be smaller and it will be autonomous. There'll be much less labor and much less infrastructure it takes to go and accomplish that goal. You won't need the roads that you need. You won't need all this infrastructure. So very exciting stuff, I think, on the horizon for businesses of all shapes and sizes. And then last but not least, I think with 5G also, and I think Mark really hit on it, is all this new opportunity of employment, skills, job-based thing. I think it's going to be a lot of creation of skills that are needed and required in the marketplace. And that'll be a great opportunity for folks. So where does fiber fit into all of this? Well, I see fiber as it's going to be critical to dictating the performance of 5G. Obviously, everyone talks a lot about the airwaves and stuff, but if you really think about it, the path that your data takes, the airwave portion is really the smallest segment of that typically when it's going. So the wireline network of the wireline network will be hugely important in the performance of 5G and to achieve those three goals that it kind of has. And where does fiber fit into that? Well, if you think about it, fiber is high capacity to achieve goal one of all this bandwidth that we've talked about coming in. It's low latency, secure, and can accomplish all these things. And there's already a robust marketplace for the backhaul now, and we see that, and we're all kind of involved in that in some way, a lot of us. But I think with 5G maturing, the standards coming into place, and some of the shifts in the way the network will be architected, it will increase a much more robust marketplace for the front haul of the network. And once that network gets fully virtualized, I could envision things segmenting and having a mid-haul network in the marketplace as well, which is exciting for someone like me who, and our business who competes in that space and all the fiber that we have. So just real quick, a little bit more about LOGIX fiber network today. We have a robust fiber footprint throughout Texas, approaching 7,000 route miles throughout Texas. We're a enterprise and business company, about 1,000+ enterprise businesses here in Texas, and that is our full-time jobs. And we offer a full suite of products, like everyone, from fiber all the way up to your hosted platforms of voice and everything. Again, we have a rich history in all of those things. And then I'll finally end with a little bit on Austin, particularly for LOGIX, as I think I've repeated a number of times. We are a Texas-based company. We serve all the major markets in the dash markets in Texas, and certainly proud to service Austin as well. We've made a lot of investments in recent years into the Austin infrastructure. more than doubled our presence here in Austin in the last 4 years through our own organic construction of fiber, as well as some acquisitions as well. So we're fully committed to Austin. We service more than 1,000 buildings in the Austin area. And we service, all verticals of businesses here in Austin. And I live in Austin, so I'm kind of partial. I love it here. And a lot of our senior leadership for LOGIX lives here as well. And that's what I got. Thanks, everyone.
Great. We have some questions. Our first question is, who will be paying for these advancements? Will the consumer see significant increased costs for their cell phone accounts?
Ooh, I'll ask that from somebody in the cellular industry, but I would say it's going to be a little bit of a mix across the board. Look, bandwidth has been a commodity for years, right? And the cost of bandwidth goes down and down while the demand for it goes up and up. So I think you'll continue to see businesses have to make considerable capital investments in their network just to keep up and stay relevant. And I would say that that's probably going to drive consumer costs down in the long term, but I could potentially see a premium on 5G services in the near term as they're new.
And then this one, with more people working remotely now and likely in the future, how is LOGIX thinking about cybersecurity for its customers in light of 5G expanding?
Well, so cybersecurity is a topic I think for everyone and all of us to deal with, either personally or certainly on corporate levels. So I think that's an ongoing spy versus spy game, as always, on the cybersecurity front. So we take it very seriously. We're obviously in the fiber and data business, not so much on the wireless side, as we would feed sites. So, we approach cybersecurity very much from that standpoint of protecting our wireline infrastructure and handling it from that perspective.
Great, and just one last one. What are you most excited about 5G?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of stuff. I'm kind of, I'm a geek from way back. So, it's all the stuff. I mean, it's going to sound pretty nerdy. It's everything from gaming services on your phone that could be really cool for an old nerd like me, or, some of these really science fiction-y things that sound so unrealistic today, but in 5 years could really be here.
Great. Let's see. Thank you, Shane. That was very informative. And thank you to everybody. Thank you to Dave from AT&T and Rondella and John from the City of Austin, Mark from Crown Castle, and of course, Shane. Thank you, everybody, to all of the attendees that came out today, and thank you for being a member of Austin Tech. You can learn more about Austin Tech Alliance at austintech.org. We are a member-supported 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit, so we rely on your member dues to host programs like this and other sorts of initiatives and policy changes. You can learn more about ATA at austintech.org and follow us on Twitter, where there is a recap of this event at Austin Tech. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and sign up for our newsletter and follow our social media to hear about our next event on July 7th. Thank you so much.